What is up, epic gamers? It's your boy Dashy. We are back again with another video. This time we're going to be talking about the differences between U-turning and air braking. So before we get started, I'm going to try to give a quick overview. A few weeks ago I recorded some clips to use in a general tips for beating velo time trials video, but I kind of shelved the idea. A few days ago I made a guide for out of times time trial, and I used a few of the clips about air braking and U-turning in that video instead. In the time trial guide series, I've littered general tips throughout the whole thing. This is great for those who are actively watching the video series, but it's not super helpful for people that are looking for those specific topics. If they're searching for how to U-turn or what reserves are, they aren't going to click on something titled Crash Cove Time Trial Guide. And the same thing goes for what is the best class to use, which I talked about during the Dragon Mines video. And of course, the difference between air braking and U-turning, which I talked about in Out of Time. Because of this, I've decided to unshelf the general tips video idea I had, but this topic is big enough that it honestly deserves its own video. This will give me the opportunity to focus more on the explanation and go more in depth on it. The rest of the tips will most likely be packed into a single video. Now that I'm done with the overview, let's get started. U-turning is performed by letting off of the gas, pressing diagonally down in the direction you want to turn, and holding a brake. The cart will then turn in a tight arc without losing fire. This can be performed in the air or on the ground, and the latter is referred to as a ground U-turn. Air braking is performed basically the same way, but without the down direction, and instead just pushing left or right while braking. The cart will continue moving forward, but will basically rotate on its axis until you let go of the brake, where it will then slingshot into the direction you're facing. This can only be performed while in the air without losing fire. The moment you touch the ground, if you're still holding the brake, you will lose fire. These differences could be massive, and are why you basically never see a high-level player that's using air brakes. Instead, they'll only opt to use U-turns. There are actually a few small edge cases where air braking can be better, but it only applies to the absolute optimization of a few corners in the entire game. I'll talk about those more later, but for now, let's go over the many reasons why U-turning is superior, and some tips that might help you understand the technique a little bit better, making it easier to pull off. First and foremost, I'm going to jump into the reason as to why it's faster. This comes down to some nerd shit, but basically it's just because geometry and a little bit of trigonometry. For both techniques, the cart will turn at the same rate, meaning it will take the same amount of time for the cart to be facing the desired direction. Let's take an example where we need to make a sharp right 90-degree angle turn. Let's say, just for instance, that it will take air braking this much time for the cart to turn the full 90 degrees. This line is exactly 72 pixels long. At the end of the 72 pixels, the cart is facing directly to the right. This means that a U-turn will also be facing directly to the right at the end of a 72 pixel line. But that line will be a constant arc to the right, because a U-turn will continuously move forward in the direction you're facing while executing the turn. Both the green and red lines are the exact same length here, but the U-turn has already moved 45 pixels to the right, as opposed to the air brake, which has moved 0 pixels to the right yet, and is just now reaching its desired angle. This might visually make a little more sense if we add air brake's exit to the corner as well. We'll make it a nice square and have it go 72 pixels in the desired direction. However, obviously to make it fair, we have to add that 72 pixels to U-turn's exit in the desired direction as well. As you can see, U-turning is still in the lead, as it used its time and distance traveled in a more efficient way. The difference between the two only grows larger with the more extreme turns. Before actually putting thought into this, I was giving more credit to air braking than it deserved. As a bonus, this is how I thought the two used to compare, until I started thinking about how it was mathematically not possible. The next thing I want to talk about is the flexibility and forgiveness of U-turning in comparison to air braking. In the Out of Time video, this is mostly what I talked about, but I'll bring it up again. In this game, if you're holding down, your fire won't be killed if you hit the brakes whether you're in the air or on the ground. Because of this, U-turning isn't constrained only to areas where you can get enough air time to finish the turn, like air braking is. So you have a much larger window of time to make the turn without losing fire. Because of this, U-turning can be considered much more forgiving. A lot of people complain that they find U-turning to be too difficult, and use that as an excuse to not learn it, instead sticking with air braking. Personally, I don't really see how it's any more difficult, as the only difference in terms of actually performing the techniques is a slight different directional input. Air braking being just straight left or right, while U-turning is a diagonal input, either being down left or down right. But aside from that, there are some tips to make it a little easier. Most important for me is knowing that you can preemptively hold the down button before you even start your U-turn. Again, all that matters is that you have a reverse input being sent before pressing brake. So you can basically just keep the down button held like a full second before and after you begin and end braking. This can take away some of the pain of trying to time everything right. Next up is pretty straightforward, but it's the simple fact that U-turning works the same way on both D-pad and analog. In the original game, you legitimately couldn't U-turn on an analog stick, but that isn't the case here. Just push the stick down at a diagonal angle as if it were the D-pad and it'll work just fine. One last tip is that you can actually map D-pad down to a different button through PS4's accessibility options if you need to. Using this, you'll be able to turn normally with either D-pad or analog, and then when you need to U-turn, you just hold down the button that you just bound down button to. Personally to me, this doesn't sound much easier as it requires an extra finger to coordinate everything with, but some people have mentioned their success with this idea. So with all this being said, with U-turning being both faster and more forgiving than air braking, what purpose does air braking even serve? Well, to put it simply, in almost any given situation, it doesn't have one. In almost every single instance of cornering, it is better to U-turn as opposed to air brake. For the sake of being thorough, I'll bring up the few instances where air braking may actually be better. Cortex Castle. I have to say maybe because the world record doesn't implement it, but using a little bit of logic, you could assume it'd be better. Remember, air braking's lines for sharp turns make a literal right angle in a square shape, which is the exact shape of a lot of the inside lines to corners on Cortex Castle. I'm going to use someone else's gameplay to show you what I mean. The footage used here is from Velo's Toes. It's worth noting that Velo actually plays CTR with a hitbox, a fight stick that uses 4 directional buttons rather than a joystick. This allows him to give precise inputs exactly when he wants them. Even when performed correctly, this is only saving maybe 1 or 2 frames over U-turning, while being extremely risky, which is why most players choose not to use this technique. It's only really going to be useful once we're talking about saving literal frames. I hope you guys found this video useful, and maybe it cleared up some misconceptions. In celebration of hitting 3,000 subscribers, I'm currently holding a Q&A on my channel. In the description is a link to a video where you can comment your questions, and at the end of next week, I'll post a video of me answering all those questions. If you enjoyed the content, consider supporting me on Patreon, as well as subscribing and following me on Twitter, where you can get updates when I release new videos, and of course see all the other dumb things I say on the internet. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.